To begin HIP's corporate armchair conversation, welcome the Executive Director for the Southeast region at JPMorgan Chase, Maria Escorcia, the Senior Director of Community Impact at McDonald's, Monica Tijerina, and today's moderator, the Director of Digital Skills for Microsoft Philanthropies, Lucas Hernadez.
I love being part of lunch because you have the energy, and we're about to crash for the coffee afterwards. So we're going to get into the conversation as much as we can. As we know, we have networking right after this. So if I could invite you into your seats if you can, but also appreciate that we're all so excited to be here. And can I just say a huge round of applause again for the HIP team, who's provided such an incredible platform for all of us to connect with one another. And I don't know about you all, but I am riding so high from the earlier conversations and so excited about what's to come. So in this conversation, as you can tell by the bios, we're going to be talking a little bit about corporate philanthropy. So all of us in this room, and I've had wonderful conversations earlier today, we all have our own understanding and situationships, to borrow from an earlier panel and a wonderful term that I heard before, around corporate philanthropy. So on this panel today, I'm super excited to be joined by two incredible leaders who represent what I think to be the best of corporate philanthropy. And the best of corporate philanthropy always works in the best interests of our community. So I'm super excited in that spirit to introduce to the stage Maria, who represents JPMorgan Chase and their philanthropy work in the foundation, and Monica, who represents McDonald's and their social impact work. Before we jump into the conversation, I first wanted to talk about philanthropy. It's an implicit thing as in this all conference, and really for all of us, it's important to understand the meaning of philanthropy and how it roots in our community. A lot of times, us coming into this field, there's a lot of sacrifices that we all have to make in order to move forward the arc for our communities. And I think for us in the corporate world, all of us have, thankfully, a lot of experience being outside of the corporate environment. Because a lot of times building relationships with philanthropy groups and building relationships with community really requires an understanding to be empathetic, but also to take a step back to understand the history of how we got here. And the term trust-based philanthropy has been done in our communities since the beginning that we built a community. That's not a term that was created in a published article and something that is sort of an idea. It's something that we live in our everyday lives. So with that spirit, I would love to invite first for us to kind of define corporate philanthropy by first asking the question of Maria and then Monica, just to explain a little bit about your company, how you structure philanthropy, and how decisions are made, because I think that's a really important way to start the conversation.
Thank you, Lucas. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying their lunch. This is so exciting. I'm so excited to be here. I was telling Ana Maria that last time I was at one of the HIP conferences was years ago in San Francisco. And to see the growth, I actually didn't realize that there was an overflow room. She just told me that. So this is incredible. And congratulations to HIP, and thank you for having me. So thank you, Lucas. So at JPMorgan Chase, we have been pioneering a model for corporate responsibility over a decade now, in which philanthropy sits at the intersection of other groups, other colleagues, other functions under the corporate responsibility umbrella. So we have corporate philanthropy, or the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, which is where I sit, but I'm joined with colleagues in government relations, public engagement, sustainability, the JPMorgan Chase Institute, the JPMorgan Chase Policy Center. So it's really a group and a combination of colleagues that are thinking about the issues that matter most in our communities. And our thinking behind this is that we have seen that to produce meaningful change in our communities, we really need to think about how philanthropy combines with public policy, with community engagement. It's a collaboration among different functions and different colleagues. And we have really seen this in action, in work, in communities across the globe. One example that we have that I can give today is during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, our JPMorgan Chase Institute, which is a think tank within the firm, put out a report, really put a spotlight in the hardships that renters were facing. Using the data that the firm has obviously de-identified for privacy, But using the data that we have, we were really able to understand some of the issues, the hardships, which communities were suffering the most. And after our own research, we were able to commit over $400 million in philanthropic capital to deploy in creating solutions and supporting programs and initiatives that were and very targeted in the communities and those groups that were really the most affected to really support the issue. And we didn't stop there with philanthropic capital. Then we had our policy center, our government relations colleague, really help working in tandem with us all over the country, thinking about how do we support our communities. You asked the question, how do we make decisions in terms of philanthropy? We really ask ourselves, are we the right partner to be here in front of this issue? Do we have the resources to really advance this? Is it the right time? Do we have the right stakeholders at the table? And if we see all the conditions there, we come in with we say the full force of JPMorgan Chase, the full force of the firm to really support our communities and advance issues. On the ground, we have program officers with the foundation everywhere in the globe, really. And they're local people. So in my case, I sit in Miami, I cover the Southeast, and I'm from Miami, I'm from that community with you. And so similarly, across the country, I have my JPMC colleagues here in Chicago. So in every one of our communities, we have our local team, our local colleagues that are part and embedded in our communities. And so through our program officers, we are in constant interaction with our community organizations, with foundations, all of the stakeholders, really identifying the issues that matter most to our communities. And in partnership with our other teams internally, we're able to make decisions on how do we deploy our philanthropic capital.
Yeah, and what I hear from that is proximate to the community and understanding that one company is not or cannot claim to be representing the views of a community. And I just want to go to Monica with the same question just around the structure, because I know there's so many great examples of obviously the local aspect of the work you all do. So curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, so share a little bit of information with you. You might know us for our burgers and fries, and that's pretty easy to understand. You've got a local McDonald's, I'm sure, wherever you live, wherever you work. And then after that, we like to make everything more difficult and different. But we're a franchised organization, so that impacts a lot of how you'll see us showing up philanthropically in communities. We also don't have a corporate foundation, and so oftentimes people don't understand that all of the corporate giving that we make is from our corporate headquarters, out of what we call our G&A funds. So sometimes I work on the corporate side, and sometimes I like to joke with people that, you know, when we put together the decision-making framework, we have to put together a business case to support why this investment not only supports communities, but also supports the business. So I joke that it's me up against the people making the argument for new fryers, and so our decision-making process is a little bit different. But that's at the corporate level, right? So we also have country-level leadership, and those countries will also make investments in their communities on behalf of the corporation. And then you might see a McDonald's logo in your Little League field in your neighborhood, and likely those contributions have been made by a franchisee or a franchisee organization. And so the decision-making process is a little bit different depending on where you go. I'll give you an example of how those all come together, though. At the corporate level where I work, we look after the globe, and we try and identify those opportunities that make sense for our business globally. So one of our philanthropic impact focus areas is showing up for communities in times of need. Often when there's a disaster, McDonald's is at the center of a community, and we're the first place folks are going, and sometimes can be the first place where we're getting, you know, food and water available for communities. So with that in mind, at the Global Center, we partner with the Red Cross, the network of Red Crosses through the American Red Cross. We're an ADGP partner. If you're familiar with that, we make an annual commitment of $1 million to, you know, try and proactively support the work that the network of the Red Crosses do. At a market level or a country level, I'll use an example of Canada. Our Canada market also has a partnership with the Canadian Red Cross. So if there is, you know, a disaster or a time of need in Canada, they've got that local, and by local I mean country level relationship. And also, the Red Cross does a lot to address needs of communities like a fire. If a fire happens in the middle of the night and a family needs a place to stay or they're taking care of them, oftentimes our franchisees will support directly with that very local, very time-sensitive need. So, the franchisee model makes this a little bit more complicated. We don't have a foundation, so everything that we give is run through our, setting up a business case to get the funds annually. And that process goes through, I sit in our global sustainability and social impact function. It's a team within a function, our global impact function, but through our chief sustainability and social impact officer, we put together the business case alongside all of the other business cases each year to make the ask for philanthropic funds at the corporate level.
Super helpful. And I just wanted to bring in an editorial note. So I realized I didn't fully introduce myself, but I represent a large technology company. And one of the things that I just want to make sure that we're explicit about is the whole reason why corporate philanthropy began is because obviously there's inequities in the system at which corporates perpetuate and move forward, and obviously like the balance of everything else. So I think there's a responsibility underlying all of this work for us to understand what are the chances and opportunities for us to directly impact the communities that allowed us to create wealth as companies. And all of us here represent sort of that journey that Bob shared of the ancestors that brought us to this moment. So what I would love to transition to, obviously every company clearly is different, just like every foundation clearly is different and every community is clearly different. Can we get to specific examples perhaps of how we and you all in your work have directly impacted Latino communities around the United States, and particularly like with the lens towards engagement or folks in the audience that would want to engage with you, if we could maybe go into that. So maybe Maria, if you'd like.
Sure. So I think, Lucas, as I was saying, JPMorgan Chase obviously is a global firm. We have close to 300,000 employees all over the world, but we are local to our communities. And that really is evident through our branch network, our Chase branches, which actually I was driving up this morning to this hotel, and of course, what do I see downstairs? There's a Chase branch. Just like you, I just realized that we should partner, Monica, between there's a McDonald's everywhere, there's a Chase branch everywhere. And in moments of disaster also, we use our branches for people to come in as well. So we have branches everywhere, and we like to include not only our corporate responsibility colleagues, not only the philanthropic efforts and initiatives, but also our lines of businesses and our colleagues in the business. And so through our branches, one of the ways in which we support our communities, including our Latina communities, is through providing financial health, financial literacy, financial coaching workshops. Only last year, we reached over 400,000 people in helping them to provide the tools and resources they need to become financially secure and financially stable, thinking about savings for retirement, home ownership, and everything in between. Last year also, the firm committed we're going to hire at least 500 new small business consultants and bankers to go out there and support our minority entrepreneurs, those entrepreneurs that have businesses in our communities that are neighborhood-based. And we know that our community in particular is very entrepreneurial. So by default, in a lot of our communities, these business consultants, these business bankers are out there supporting, providing technical assistance to entrepreneurs in all of our communities. And then obviously through philanthropic capital, I can list a number of examples in which we are supporting our community. I had a conversation with my Chicago-based colleagues this morning because obviously I wanted to bring a local example, and I hope they're here. So we've been supporting since 2019 an organization called Instituto del Progreso Latino, specifically supporting the program on training Latinas to become nurses, certified nurses. So the whole training certification process is free of charge. But the program on top of that also provides all sorts of wraparound services in terms of financial education and other services for Latinas to be able to complete and graduate and join the workforce. Closer to me in Florida, and I actually just realized that I see Felipe there with Hispanic Unity. So we have a lot of examples local in Florida. There's another organization, the Hispanic Initiative Business Fund, known as Prospera. And Prospera is out there in the community as well, providing technical assistance, access to capital, access to networks for small business owners. They do this program only 100% in Spanish. And our support has been initially in their headquarters in Orlando and Central Florida, expanding their operations everywhere in Florida. They're working in Miami and South Florida now. They have boots on the ground in Jacksonville. And then this year, we're in the process of reviewing a new grant that will allow this organization to expand to West Florida, Southwest Florida, a region that was really impacted by the hurricane last year, and that has a high number of Latino-owned businesses and really basically no entrepreneurial ecosystem support. And so we have, again, numbers of examples through our philanthropic investments that support our communities.
And one of the things that I just wanted to bring back as well is this is an asset building opportunity, period. That's what we need to do at Philanthropy to understand how do we as community members build wealth in our communities, and small business ownership and the work you all are doing seem to be very focused on that idea uniquely of how do you activate you as a financial institution to support that journey from wealth building to wealth achievement for communities. So that's what I got from that. And Monica, I know there's a lot of similar economic work that you all are focused on. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So it all starts again with everything that we do philanthropically from the corporate center, which is where I work, is based on the business case, right? And so when you think about supporting Latino communities as a business case, there's a really strong one there. We know that as a business. To steal some data from the HACER Corporate Inclusion Index, 20% of the US population is Latinos or Latines. I'm not getting the language right. And we also know that makes us the second largest consumer base, right? The second largest part of the population, which as a business, it makes sense for us to be looking at that population really seriously. And we know that if you want that population, if you want Latinos, Latinas to respect you and to trust you, you need to be making investments in the communities and doing well by the communities, right? So unfortunately, while 20% of the US population is Latino, Latina, only 10% of corporate donations go to that population. So we're looking at that very seriously to say, like, how do we balance that? How do we balance the business opportunity by engaging with those communities with what we're doing from a philanthropic investment perspective? Interestingly, that also means that soon we will be 20% of the labor force in the US. And so a second area of focus for our philanthropic efforts is in opportunity employment. So reducing barriers to employment for people who, have been disproportionately disengaged from jobs. And we also know that McDonald's is one of the largest, if not the largest, employers of young people. So when we look at that all together, we decided, and I'll use a really local example because I'm from Chicago here, and I actually saw some great Latina leaders walking around. Nationally, we're supporting organizations like HACER, who does the Corporate Inclusion Index, so that we can have the information, the data that we need to make informed decisions. Also partnering organizations like ACE, have to point out to Patricia over there. But here locally, we just entered into a partnership with the Chicago Community Trust, which is led by another really impressive Latina leader. If Andrea's here, I saw her in the lobby. But we kicked off a grants program, a Chicago Community Grants program in 2022 to invest millions of dollars into organizations addressing the needs of Black and brown communities in the Chicago area with a specific focus on workforce development. And so through that partnership so far, and again, I want to get the numbers right, so excuse me while I look at my data, we've been able to connect over 13,000 young people with counseling, financial literacy, mentoring programs, and then over 6,000 of those young people have been directly engaged in workforce development training, which is really great for our community, but the unique opportunity for the way that we can engage is then McDonald's is ready to support them with jobs, right? So once they've gone through workforce development training, they're going into jobs at Chase Bank. Hopefully they're also coming to McDonald's. So for us, that's really we see that as a unique value proposition, both for the business and for the Latino community.
Yep. And I just wanted to lift up, too, I heard of a report this morning on a panel, The Color of Wealth, from Henry Ramos from the Institute of Race, Power, and Political Movements, I believe it is. Just around the wealth gap there, it's so stark and important for us to center in the conversation just, how over time, no matter what the population and demographic growth of our community looks like, the wealth gap has not grown. And clearly there needs to be greater interventions, and what the panel earlier was about small organizations in sort of the sort of larger tapestry of what we can do as philanthropists and funders to help bring that power closer to community. So I'm realizing we have a little bit of time here. I was wondering if I could go a little off script to ask a question that you could feel free to not answer, but I'm just trying to understand, in the context of corporate philanthropy, one of the important things that I keep hearing in this conversation and my experience is that we're very much sort of taken sort of in control of by the fiscal year cycle and the demands of a company, the publicly traded companies especially, the demands to shareholders, the demand to grow profit, all these things we're operating in this system where we're trying to find power for our communities and then bring that power directly there through financial resources. So I just wanted you to reflect on sort of what are the sort of the mechanisms or the tools that you've been able to personally sort of use to, one, achieve that aim, and then two, be able to protect your peace in that process, because at least for me, that process has really drained a lot of, my energy to fight in a lot of ways too. So I don't know, Monica, Maria, if there's anything that made you think of or reflect on.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. And you're right, you did not prep us that we would get this question, but luckily it goes back to, for us, I will say, we're not a foundation, so I'm always very transparent with folks about that. It's very difficult for us to make multi-year commitments because we are subject to the fiscal, the fiscal budgeting process. But the other thing that I'll say that has worked really well for me, we made a commitment in 2018 to reduce barriers for 2 million opportunity youth around the world. And that required a big investment over multiple years. And the reason we were able to really get that sustainability within the business is because we made the business case for it, right? This is both addressing a very important need and for communities, but it's addressing an important need for the business. So I think where you can, in a corporate giving environment, tie it to a business need, it gives it that extra, the extra grip to withstand over years.
It's almost messaging and building kind of the narrative around the idea so that it's achieving what you want, but also, presented in a way that it's aligning to the business. So, and Maria.
So, Monica, I think very similar to you. Well, very different, but very similar at the same time. So we do have a corporate foundation, the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, where we have an annual budget that we deploy every single year in the communities where we live and work. But we also do this because we know that the success of our communities will also be the success of our business. If people have jobs, if people are buying homes, if communities are thriving, if the economy is thriving, and it's an inclusive economy, then our business is going to thrive as well. So we do this because it's the right thing to do, but it's a good thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and it's good for our business as well. We do have a fiscal year, we have our mandates, we have our 4 pillars, all aimed at promoting inclusive economic development and strengthening financial systems in our communities. And so we do have that narrow focused strategy. And in thinking and hearing people this morning talk about trust-based philanthropy, we are having initial conversations internally. We're not there yet.
Yep.
We're definitely not there yet. We do need to do, it's a business, we need to produce, promote, show for what we're trying to accomplish. So we're having interesting conversations, but we are really, really kind of narrow focused in the mission that we want to accomplish in the community.
So we do have 1 minute left. I've learned our timer's not working, so we're going to on the fly. If you could quickly, maybe Monica, we'll start with you, just quickly close with like one practical tip, knowing the audience largely is most interested to understand sort of the mechanics of how do we engage corporate funders. What's one practical tip that they could do or use to partner with organizations like yours?
Yeah, so I will say first understand the decision makers, to go back to your first question, right? So for McDonald's, it's very different than for Chase, it's very different from other corporations. And then once you have that, once you identified who the decision makers are and what they're trying to accomplish, find those shared value opportunities. So again, McDonald's partnered with the Chicago Community Trust because we had a shared value opportunity there to invest in the young people in Chicago in achieving, workforce development training, mentoring, et cetera. So understand who your partner is and then understand what's important to them and where your value overlaps.
Similarly, as Monica, sometimes we get requests that are just not simply aligned with what we do, and so it's really hard to support. But I would add something. For us, it's really important, what I was talking about earlier, philanthropy cannot be siloed. Philanthropy needs to sit at the intersection of policy, community engagement. We really need to make sure that when we go in and support a program, all the other stakeholders are at the table. We have government, we have other corporates, we have nonprofit sector, we have all the sectors, at least 2 or 3 of the sectors, really thinking about the same issues and trying to find the same solutions. So that's kind of the best way in which we can partner.
Excellent. Well, I just want to thank you all for having us. And I just wanted to quote Natanya, who's the Boston Woman Fund, who I've been just so impressed with over the time. And it's like, how do we move from a request for proposal to a request for a conversation? I think that's a really powerful narrative for all funders to consider. So thank you all, and we really appreciate it.